New overnight, the Vatican releasing the first images of the late Pope Francis lying in a coffin as the world prepares and learns more details about his upcoming funeral.
Right. So these images that you're seeing are inside the chapel of St. Martha House where he resided, and he will be taken into St. Peter's Basilica for public viewing soon, with his funeral taking place Saturday morning, 4 a.m. Eastern time. That's 10 a.m. at the Vatican.
Now, earlier this morning, cardinals gathered to start ironing out a number of items, including the Pope's the plans for conclave, the funeral, and how to elect its successor, on making the decisions about who's going to run the Catholic Church.
Yeah, to help us walk through this entire process, we're joined by C.J. Doyle, Executive Director at the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts and CEO and President of Catholics for Catholics, John Yep. Great to see you both this morning. So let's start with the American citizen who's the interim head of the Vatican right now, Cardinal Kevin Farrell. So, C.J., can you tell us a little more about Cardinal Farrell and some of his duties over the next couple of weeks?
Well, he's the Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church, which is the Chamberlain. And there used to be an office of Chancellor. That was actually abolished some years ago. So the Camerlengo is the highest ranking prelate after the Pope, and he presides during the interregnum. So he will actually be in charge of, you might say, the temporal assets of the Church until a new Pope is elected. And he's the one responsible for organizing the conclave. He's an American cardinal. I think he's Irish-born, actually, and he tends to come from, you might say, the progressivist wing that has been favored by Pope Francis. But in terms of the administration of the conclave, it's fairly straightforward. So this is really the Chamberlain in the old days used to be the kind of the treasurer of the Church. He governed all of the temporalities of the Church. He governed the person responsible for governing the papal states when the Church had governed about a third of modern Italy. But now the office is largely honorific, except for the administration of the interregnum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, so one question I know a lot of people are always asking, and I saw some reporting out there that lists 2 or 3 different U.S. cardinals who could be in line to be the next pope, but correct me if I'm wrong, Cardinal Farrell leading the church for the next 2 weeks is as close as any American is ever going to get in the near future to running the Catholic Church. Is that right?
Boy, it happens every conclave. We all get our hopes up that we're going to have a gringo American up there to ascend to the see of Peter, but almost for sure not going to happen. Yes, and Cardinal Farrell is basically running the show of an important period during this interregnum period. He does, I'm glad CJ pointed it out, he does kind of tend toward the progressive side. He was actually very closely associated with disgraced Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. Spent 6 years with him living in D.C., but apparently never saw a thing when that was going on. So anyway, he is running the show, but it's important because he's organizing all the lead-up meetings where all the cardinals are gathering from around the world to have this important time to discuss about who is the next guy. In fact, they rushed one of the early meetings is actually happening this morning, and Cardinal Zen from China, he was 80 years old, one of the most prominent men among the cardinals, actually protested the rush of decision to have the meeting start so soon before all of them could even arrive. So whatever it may be, they're pushing ahead. Funeral is Saturday, and they're looking to get this conclave going so the new pope can be chosen.
Yeah, you mentioned all of these meetings that are happening right now at the Vatican. It's in a period of mourning, obviously, but there's plenty happening as the Catholic Church prepares for the funeral, as you mentioned, and now the steps needed to pick a successor, which includes the conclave as well. They began meeting this morning, and John, as you said, some aren't too happy about that. CJ, how has this tradition changed over the years?
Well, I mean, usually, in fact, in years past, going back to the early part of the 20th century, you had some popes that were elected before cardinals had even gotten to Rome. In fact, so that was one of the early protests of the American cardinals, because they had to, travel across the ocean and so, but no, thanks be to God with the flight, and airplanes being able to do this a lot quicker.
Right,
However, it is important that they're all together to have this time and not make it a rush decision. The fact that we have a U.S. president going to the funeral on this Saturday, and all the flags are flown half-mast, just shows you, if anything, the geopolitical role of the papacy in the modern-day world.
Yeah. CJ, what can you tell us about what we're seeing take place right now and in the coming weeks?
Well, one thing is going to happen, even though there's only 135 cardinal electors, many of the cardinals who are, again, over the age of 80, who aren't eligible to vote, are still coming to Rome, like the lately retired Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Sean O'Malley. So the meetings in the lead up to the conclave will include many more cardinals than the cardinal electors. Now, there's 252 members of the College of Cardinals. There's 135 cardinal electors who are under the age of 80, and they'll be the ones that are voting. Now, conservatives are prudently concerned that because 109 of these 135 were appointed by Pope Francis. But there's something that might balance that out. I actually went through the list of cardinal electors yesterday, and 54 are from the Third World. And as we know, Catholics in the Third World aren't quite as invested in progressivist ideologies as Catholics in the First World, in Europe and America and Australasia. So this may have, I might say, balance out a little bit the fact that so many were appointed by Pope Francis.
Right.
I think that anybody who says they know what's going to happen is not being candid with you. But I think we can usefully speculate on a few things. Again, the Third World cardinals will be a little more conservative on social and cultural and moral issues. I think many of the curial cardinals, who aren't necessarily conservative, but are suffering from kind of a Francis fatigue. They found his rule to be a bit arbitrary and erratic and unilateral, and they liked it more of a kind of a traditional rules-based order. So I think that might help the conservatives a little bit. And then, of course, there's also a reaction to many of Francis's initiatives. Even some of the more liberal progressive cardinals kind of quietly ignored his campaign to suppress the traditional Latin Mass, which suggests there's not really a broad constituency to that. So we don't know, but I think we could, Pope Francis talked about the God of surprises. We may see the God of surprises in the next couple of weeks.
Yep. Going to have a lot to talk about over the next few weeks, I'm sure. CJ, John, thanks for joining us.